All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Kelsey Jones, and I'm a Senior Program Manager with the National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASEO. And we have a great lineup of speakers today to discuss an issue that really is pertinent to many states: agriculture and carbon sequestration, and also looking at some of the corresponding decarbonization and economic development opportunities. So this webinar is a series in our recently relaunched Rural Energy Working Group series. We will be talking about agriculture and carbon sequestration challenges and opportunities, and plan to share these slides and the recording with all of the attendees after this. So after our three speakers, we will also have time for some open discussion and Q&A. So please be thinking of some questions and also putting any questions for our speakers into either the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen or even to the chat feature, and I'll be sure to capture those during the discussion portion. I wanted to quickly say thank you to the U.S. Department of Energy for their support of this event and of the larger Rural Working Group effort. And following the webinar, we will have a separate states-only meeting to discuss takeaways from this webinar, along with other rural priorities. So if you haven't already registered for that event and are a representative of a state energy office, feel free to message myself or my colleague Jasmine, who is also online, and we can get you that registration link. And that will be a separate link after this webinar has ended. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce our lineup of speakers today. First off, you'll hear from Jim Jordahl. He is a project analyst at Iowa State University, followed by Guiha Chen, a senior environmental scientist with the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And lastly, Chris Mayhus, program director at the Western Sustainability Exchange. So we have a really great diversity of perspectives across 3 different states, and really looking forward to hearing their informative presentations today. So I'll turn it over to you, Jim, to get us started.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kelsey. It's definitely a pleasure to be here and able to pull up my slides. And okay, there we go. All right, thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Kind of show some perspectives from our lens here in the Midwest on agriculture and carbon. So it'd be kind of a higher level presentation, kind of hopefully orienting you toward the other presentations, but I'll cover some of the drivers and challenges and unknowns in this ag carbon space, define some of the concepts around carbon value, both in terms of emissions reduction and carbon removal in agriculture, and highlight some of the resources and opportunities that may be kind of unique to Iowa and surrounding areas of the Corn Belt. Next slide. Here we go. Yeah, in 2021, the Iowa Economic Development Authority, who's a member of NASEO and the governor's office, came to us at Iowa State looking for a science assessment around carbon sequestration, carbon markets as regards agriculture. And we pulled this together in a campus-wide effort involving dozens of scientists, some 13 departments, multiple colleges and institutes, and provided input for this task force. And this guides some of our perspectives on the scope and needs of ag and carbon. Next slide. And some of the things that we considered in this report is our economists looking at the carbon markets, kind of at that snapshot in time, what they have been in time and what they are becoming, and limitations. Technical issues around measuring, reporting, and verification, which are very important, especially in the offset market of carbon credits. Cropping systems and management, kind of the agronomy of these systems, livestock practices, most important for methane in particular, planning tools, engineering technologies. We kind of looked at next generation biofuels and things like biochar, or the conversion of biomass, ag waste, so to speak, into more persistent forms of carbon, where we are in terms of the adoption of important practices on carbon in Iowa, what those trends are, how these processes are modeled, and lastly, the very important element of life cycle analysis. We ultimately need to know kind of the cradle to grave picture of what energy and emissions are. Next slide. Iowa, we kind of coined a term. We think there's a bit of an Iowa advantage in terms of productivity at scale. This NASA image kind of highlights the sun-induced chlorophyll fluorescence, suggesting the gross primary production here in the Iowa and surrounding areas of the Corn Belt is some of the highest in the world. We're fixing a lot of carbon through photosynthesis, and we just need to find more ways to harness that where we can to reduce atmospheric concentrations and store carbon. Next slide. We have quite a range of soils in Iowa, even within the same field. Most folks are familiar with the concept of topsoil, the darker zone at the surface where carbon tends to accumulate. We have soils like that on the left, better drained, and those on the right as well that are somewhat poorly drained, where carbon may accumulate to considerable depths in the soil. The map below kind of shows the range and carbon stocks across the state, kind of depending on physiographic region. But this is part of our kind of planning process to understand what's where and what's possible. But importantly, we've lost quite a bit of carbon through time since settlement in terms of processes of erosion and oxidation from drainage, tillage factors, fertilization, and so forth. So we're working towards trying to turn those things around and store carbon going forward. Next slide. Just a quick review of the carbon cycle, which is fundamental to a lot of what we're doing on the cropland side of this. Photosynthesis is where plants fix carbon dioxide in plant tissues above and below ground. And ultimately, those tissues go back to the soil or degrade through the processes of microorganisms. And a portion of that ultimately forms organic matter, the dark stuff in the topsoil, which is about half carbon. But we have an opposing process of respiration. Those same microbes process those organic materials and release some of that as CO2, and living plants do the same. And so ultimately, we're looking for practices and programs that enhance those, that try and take the system or dial it into our advantage to store more carbon than is released back through respiration. Next slide. There's a couple of different main pathways to the value of carbon. Carbon credits and metrics worldwide are based on the carbon dioxide equivalent, particularly in metric tons there on the left. And we can work towards avoiding greenhouse gas emissions, reducing the overall level of greenhouse gases as measured by CO2e, or we can remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Avoided emissions might be things like renewable fuels, such as renewable natural gas from manure and other bioproducts. And carbon removal directly might be carbon farming, climate smart practices, soil carbon storage, or production of biochar from biomass can provide value in the marketplace. Next slide. This kind of busy slide talking about some of the drivers of this soil carbon economy. On the left-hand side, kind of in the government or corporate sector, there's various net zero commitments globally where companies are committed to reducing their overall emissions and carbon footprint. Variety of USDA and state programs and private sector programs. And in terms of volume, nearly all of the anthropogenic CO2 removal is currently based on land management, forestry or cropland, some 2 gigatons, as there's a number of other CO2 removal methods that are either very expensive or not quite yet to scale and still under development. Corporate players in particular are very focused on the co-benefits of some of the things we might do, especially on cropland, in terms of reducing erosion, improving water quality, along with storing carbon. Flipping over to the right side at the farm level, we have historic losses of soil carbon through, again, erosion, tillage, drainage, and other factors. We have now payments for changes in farming practices or the outcomes of how much carbon is stored, and we'll hear more about those in the other presentations. At the farm, we're focused on those co-benefits of practices as well, and increasingly thinking about being resilient to climate extremes, whether too much rain or not enough rain, and the increased carbon can help us buffer those extremes. Next slide. There's limitations as well. Soil carbon in particular is quite variable within a given field, slow to change, which limits our ability to measure that. And as a result, we're pretty reliant on models for many of these programs. Investors are concerned with, especially with soil carbon, the limited permanence with that stored in cropland systems, and programs need to be designed around that. And we also have a number of science unknowns, exactly being able to predict what's going to happen, and in particular nitrous oxide in our cropping systems in the Midwest, where we apply a lot of nitrogen. The nitrous oxide can actually swamp the carbon that we're storing if we're not careful. So N management is very important. On the right side, to the farmer, the market value of carbon credits is still very low, amounting to a few dollars an acre, and has to be much higher to really drive change. There's been till recently quite a few different programs around carbon, and that's increasing rapidly. It can be a bit confusing to sort out, and there's a lot of education needed around that. The concept of additionality is that a practice has to be something new and wouldn't have happened without the program that is investing in it. And that can cause issues for our longtime conservation farmers, those that have been driving sustainability approaches for some time. And over the long term, here in Iowa, we're concerned that climate change may impact our yields and ability to retain carbon and store carbon long term. And so we need to track that as well. Next slide. In terms of what we know on cropping systems, at least here in Iowa, no-till and cover crops tend to increase that soil carbon in the topsoil, at least compared to more intensive tillage systems. What we don't know as well is how the application of multiple practices at the same time, stacking them together, how that influences the stock of carbon across the entire soil profile, and additional research is needed there. Next slide. And sometimes, even if the soil carbon change isn't measurable, the change in emissions can be significant. We found if we develop an extended crop rotation, taking corn, soybeans, and expanding that into corn, soybean, oats, and alfalfa, we use a lot less energy, produce a lot less greenhouse gases, some 64% less on a carbon dioxide equivalent basis, primarily through less nitrogen. So avoided emissions are as important to the market or need to be as the carbon removal, such as carbon soil storage. Next slide. And just to kind of wrap up, just like to highlight that I believe Iowa has kind of been a leader in this ag carbon space, through development of the report that I mentioned, engineering advances, particular to things like biochar and anaerobic digestion, and working toward extension of these concepts to the agricultural community. And Iowa and the Corn Belt more broadly, has some vast potential for emissions reduction and carbon removal, from wind energy to carbon storage, to harnessing anaerobic digestion with vegetative wastes and manure. Just a lot of potential there, but there's a lot of R&D and additional investment that's needed to really realize these solutions at scale. Next slide. And for more information, there's a variety of sites here, and the QR codes. You can access the report, additional resources at the website, and a series of monthly conversations with experts from Iowa and nationwide about various carbon topics. And you can reach me at that address as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks so much, Jim, for the great remarks. Guihao, I'll turn it over to you.
You're going to share slides for me?
Looks like they're coming up right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kelsey and Jasmine for the opportunity. I'm Guihua Chen. I think I work at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, the Office of Environment, Farming and Innovation. It's my pleasure here to present our climate smart agriculture in California. Next slide, please. So California has a farm production of $51 million, and it's diverse in crops, farms, and regions. Our climate gives us an advantage on specialty crops. So half of the fruits, nuts, and vegetables are growing in California. Next slide, please. However, we have been facing climate challenges in the past decades, as many other states have facing, and the average air temperatures have increased from about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit since 1895, and also half of the largest wildfires of the last 70 years in California occurred just in 2020 and 2021. The drought, hot water, and dry weather are expected to continue. So, and also there is a food demand increasing. Next slide, please. So in order to combat climate change, California agriculture is growing opportunity for farmers, ranchers, individuals, and communities, and demonstrating leadership on climate change. We have 5 priorities, which are to foster climate smart, resilient, and restorative food systems, to build a healthy and local communities, to drive next generation talent and tools, and to enhance understanding of agriculture, and to collaborate on smarter regulations. Next slide, please. So California has ambitious climate goals, which is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. Natural and working land are a key solution. As such, California agriculture is part of the California climate solution. The Office of Environment, Farming and Innovation hosts a suite of incentives programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve soil health and agricultural productions. These programs can be divided into 3 categories. The first is to reducing livestock methane emissions. For this part, we have 2 incentives programs, which are Dairy Digester Research and Development Program, Alternative Manure Management Program. I listed here also as enteric fermentation research, which is just new. We started this year as a research program. Also, in California, irrigation is essential. Without irrigation, there's no agriculture in California. So improve irrigation efficiency is a key to for success agriculture in California. We have state water efficiency and enhancement programs. For soil, we have a healthy soils program aims to improve soil health and increase carbon sequestration. We also have a sustainable pest management program. For each of the incentives programs, we do have a technical assistance to help farmers and ranchers for program implementation. And for each of the program, we do have developed tools for greenhouse gas reduction benefit calculation. Next, please. Yeah, next slide. So this just show what our dairy digestive research and development program is. So it's a competitive grant program providing financial assistance to California dairy operations for implementation of anaerobic dairy digesters that result in methane emission reduction. Methane must be used for energy production or transportation fuel. So the program started since 2015, and the map on the right side shows the location of the programs. So all the projects funded since 2015. The maximum funding per project is $1.6 million, and it's a 2-year project term. So far, we have funded 131 incentives and demonstration projects with total $213 million awarded. For this, specifically for this program, a matching fund is required. So there's about $432 million matching funds from program recipients. The greenhouse reduction estimation is about 2.3 million metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent per year, and the project has a 10-year lifetime. Next slide, please. So this photo just showed an example of a renewable fuel on the ground as covered nozzle for digester. All those gases is cleaned to pipeline quality. Next slide, please. The Alternative Manure Management Program is also a competitive grant program, provide financial assistance to California dairy and livestock operators for implementation of non-digester manure management practices that result in methane emission reductions. There are 5 practices listed here, like pasture-based management, alternative manure treatment and storage, soil separation, flush to scrape conversion in conjugation with treatment and drying. The cap or the maximum funding amount per project is $750,000, and the project term is 2 years. Since this program started in 2017, so far we have funded 142 projects with total $86 million awarded. The annual greenhouse gas reduction benefit is about 260,000 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent. And each project is expected to have a 5-year lifetime. Next, please. The State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program is also a competitive grant program that provides financial assistance to farmers and ranchers to implement irrigation systems that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and save water on California agricultural operations. The eligible system components including soil moisture monitoring, drip systems, pump retrofits, variable frequency drivers, and the installation of renewable energy to reduce on-farm water use and energy. We have a tool developed to calculate greenhouse gas reduction benefits from project implementation and also to estimate water savings for irrigation management and system improvement. The maximum funding amount per project is $200,000, and the project has a 2-year grant term. This photo just shows what the irrigation, drip irrigation, and water meter and solar panel for water pump. Next slide, please. The SWIP program started since 2014 when California has started 4-year continuous drought. Since then, we have awarded over 1,100 projects with total $126 million. The greenhouse gas reduction benefits is about 90,000 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent annually, and the water saving is estimated to be 150 1,000 acre-feet on an annual basis. Each funded project is expected to have a 10-year lifetime. And the next slide shows the project location from each funded round. The Healthy Source Program, yes, let's go to this. The Healthy Source Program, the objectives of this program are to increase statewide implementation of conservation management practices that improve soil health, sequester carbon, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It has two components. The first is incentives program, which provides financial incentives to farmers and ranchers to implement the conservation management practices. The maximum funding amount is $100,000 per project. We are proposing to increase to $200,000 and start from this year. And we try to use the EQUIP methodology for the payment rate. Yeah, I think I can discuss it later if you have questions. And also the second component is a demonstration project, which provides fundings to universities, resource conservation districts, and nonprofit organizations to demonstrate the implementation of conservation management practices, connect the data on greenhouse gas emissions, soil health, cost benefit, or profitability, ecosystem services, and other core benefits, and also provide education to our farmers and ranchers. The maximum funding amount for research-based Type A project is $300,000 and $150,000 for outreach-focused Type B project. Next, please. So this just lists what the eligible practices we have in the program is divided into like cropland management practices, which are annual cropland, perennial cropland, orchard, or vineyards, and grazing practices of the four. Besides those, we also have a woody cover establishment, herbaceous cover establishments. Those planting practices may be eligible to all of the ecosystems, may be eligible to only some of them, so it depends on the situation. Next slide, please. This just shows a screenshot for the model we have been used for estimation of greenhouse gas reduction benefits calculation for the Healthy Source Program. It's co-developed by USDA, NASEO, Colorado State University, California Air Resources Board, and the California Department of Food and Agriculture. So it's really simple, user-friendly model. Like farmers have to, they just need to enter to select the project location where the county is and what ecosystem they're going to do the practice on, what system, what practice they're going to implement, and enter acres, and the model will automatically calculate the greenhouse gas emission achieved from the practice implementation. It's on an annual basis, so it's very user-friendly. Next, please. So this is a mapping tool we have been developed, which actually improved a lot to streamline application process. It's very user-friendly and easy application for farmers to select the project design and do budget calculation. I also have the website link here is live, so you can, if you're interested, you can just go and to check it out. Next, please. The Healthy Source Program started in 2018. So by last year, we have funded 1,600 projects. The map on the left side shows the numbers of projects in each county, because it's just too many. I cannot put dots in on the map. And the total funding amount awarded is $106 million. For this program, matching funds is not required, but we do have a farmer or rancher recipients voluntarily to include matching funds. That's $80 million. for all the projects as like 180,000 acres are covered. The greenhouse reduction benefits is 360,000 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent annually. This program has a 3-year project term for soil management practices such as cover crop compost application. They have to be implemented once per year for continuously 3 years. For woody cover plantings, the expected lifetime is about 10 years. Next slide, please. I think as all other programs, like federal programs, we also have challenges. The first is program funding is uncertain. Because its funding source is varies depend on state budget availability. We have programs not receive fundings every year, and also specifically for the Healthy Soils program, the challenges in practice implementation. Last year we had really severe drought. We have recipients called us to cancel the project because they couldn't grow crops and they don't want to implement the project because no crop is growing there. And also for cover crop and other planting practices such as ranch planting, where irrigation is not available or farmers don't want to use the water, the precious water to grow cover crop, so they are heavily depend on the rainfall, and sometimes the implementation may not successful. And also sometimes people may constrained by source of materials. For example, compost application from farm side or from environmental, the energy emission side, we don't want them to transport compost from a far location. So sometimes farmers have to cancel the project because they don't find the locally available compost. And also long-term implementation is always a challenge in ag land. However, because we have developed all the technologies and the systems, so our task now is to scale up, and we want to put out our technologies and the systems to work on as many farmers and as many acres as we can. Yeah, I think it's still a learning process. We're making progress. We're doing pretty well. I hope our program, our state can achieve more through the ag system, the climate smart agriculture. I think that's all. And next slide just shows our program the department website and our program website. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Guiha. I'll turn it over to Chris to round us out.
All right. Well, thank you for the context, previous speakers, and thank you for the opportunity to present what we're doing up here in Montana. My name is Chris Mayhews. I work for Western Sustainability Exchange. We're a regenerative ag organization we're celebrating our 30th year of existence, working with innovative ranchers that are really trying to responsibly grow commodity products on the ground while taking good care of the environment. One of the topics that was suggested was to talk about this climate smart initiative that the federal government is funding. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been granted. I think the projects are just getting started. Basically, the reason behind the funding, the program is designed to highlight benefits of innovative ranchers and farmers that are doing better practices that essentially care better for the environment. So as Jim and Guiha had referred to, we're talking about practices that adhere to the 6 principles of soil health. And I won't go into the specifics of those here, but just suffice it to say that what we're talking about is practices that are less invasive, that work with nature instead of against nature, and practices that promote natural processes that can help sequester greenhouse gases, create healthier water, and enhance biodiversity. So we're involved in 3 of those climate smart projects, not as a primary applicant, rather as supporting. And to kind of go back to what Jim had talked about in terms of measuring the benefits of practices, that's an area that we've been focusing on for the last couple of years, and I'll talk about a tool that we're working on here to develop in just a few minutes. Anyway, those 3 projects are the Pecani Health Lodge of the Blackfeet Nation up in the northern part of the state. They're working on a beef marketing project, and they're working on encouraging their producers to use better grazing practices in order to sequester soil carbon. That is also the goal of the Thousand Hills Regenerative Beef Program. They're a business that is centered out of Minnesota, but they work with ranches. They source beef from ranches all across the West that are doing better practices, again, to improve grazing management and enhance soil health, sequester carbon. And then the other project involves protein marketing, so beef, lamb, pork, and then a company called the Other Half Processing. They're also out of Minnesota. What they do is they work on the rest of the animal. So they work on offal products that can be sourced and utilized for leather or tallow, other products that can come from the animal, and value can be added again for better practices. So we're talking about practices that enhance environmental health, that create some of these ecosystem benefits. I think both previous speakers talked about that, but we need to find good ways to measure how these practices are in fact improving the environment. So that's a difficult challenge. And one of the things that an initiative that we started about 3 years ago is called the Land Health Dashboard. So Jasmine, if you want to pull up that, my first visual aid there. We created this tool to, first of all, help the rancher better manage their grazing lands. And so it assists with planning, managing the animals over time, and then documenting the improved practices of grazing management. It's based on agreed to and decades old proven principles of rangeland management that research institutions and projects and publications and practitioners have all agreed to over the years that do create healthier plant communities, greater plant diversity, healthier soil, greater water infiltration, all of those ecosystem processes that are important on the rangeland. The primary differentiation really, though, in the practices that we're talking about is, everybody likes to talk about mob grazing, or there's all kinds of different terminology for different types of systems and how we manage the animals. But the most important principle, I think, in all of that is prioritizing rest and recovery to allow those plants to grow, to allow adequate opportunities, especially for the preferred species of plants, to get a chance to grow and recover. And that lends itself then to soil health. What this rest affords then is stockpiling of biomass out there on the land. So what we're doing is growing greater and greater amounts of plants. We're creating better diversity of plants, which allows for protecting the soil for greater amounts of the year. So that results in less erosion, less water loss to runoff and evaporation, which again encourages more and greater plant growth and diversity. And then we're also talking about creating more and better water sources. So if we're going to manage animals more intensively and keep them moving around more frequently, which allows for those longer rest periods, we've got to have a greater availability of water out there on the ground, watering sources. So the goal of this land health dashboard, if you want to go to the next visual, is again to empower. Let's see, I had another slide, but you can just leave that one up for now. There we go, this one. So it's really to empower better grazing management based on those principles that I talked about, to provide proof of the actual improvements to this grazing management over time. We want to measure certain ecosystem metrics. So whether it be water availability in the soil, or it be soil carbon itself, or we look at biodiversity and different populations of animals and key indicator species, we can map the grazing management improvements that we make over time against those different ecosystem metrics that we think are important. And so by measuring these things and empowering better management on the land, hopefully we allow access to new and higher value markets. And I think Jim alluded to this earlier. There's really two different classifications for different types of carbon markets. There's the insetting market, which is kind of what the climate smart projects that I referred to earlier. That's really what those projects are designed to help with. Is we're creating efficiencies in the production system, the meat production system specifically for a lot of those projects, so that we're using less fuel, we're emitting less carbon into the atmosphere, and we're also sequestering that carbon through the grazing practices and by promoting soil health. But that system is those carbon credits or carbon benefits are inset in that production system. So you're buying a beef product that has carbon credits attached to it that are created within that animal production system. The other alternative is an offset market, and we're participating in that through a partnership with a company called NASEO. So if you want to go to the last visual here, and just checking my time, make sure I don't go over too much so we have time for questions. So we've been working with NASEO on this project for about 7 years now. It is a grazing project here in the Northwest. So we're working in the states of Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho primarily now, and working on expanding that in the next few years. It is a project that basically rewards better grazing management through voluntary offsets that come from companies and individuals that can't offset their entire footprint themselves. So they need to go out to a marketplace to purchase credits. We signed the first contracts with ranchers in 2019. There were 4 ranches and 35,000 acres. Today we're up to 9 ranches and 120,000 acres. So it's been growing slowly because there were all kinds of things that we needed to do to get the project registered on the Vera exchange. It's an independent body that reviews carbon offset markets and all the protocols and practices and due diligence that has to go into those. And that we've now been approved both from a verification and validation standpoint on our project. Essentially what we're doing is incentivizing improved grazing management. So we're working with nature instead of against her. And we use the investments from the buyers, willing buyers in this carbon marketplace, to create that better management. As Jim alluded to earlier, I want to reiterate that additionality is really key in these marketplaces. So we can't pay people for what they've already done or would have done without some kind of incentive payment, which can cause some difficulties that Jim talked about. And then permanence is another key. And so what we're talking about here is improving soil health on permanent pasture. So the ranchers are not allowed to till these pastures at all. And they're in long-term forage, and they are agreeing to improve their practices over the 30-year period of the contract. So just looking quickly at this diagram, and I'll wrap it up here in just the next few minutes. But starting on the left there, you've basically got the company or the individual who feels compelled to offset their carbon footprint in some way. So they make an investment in development of a project. So we work with our partner NASEO to sit down with the rancher and basically go through pasture by pasture and discuss with them how they can improve their grazing management. First of all, that requires a lot of system improvements. So a lot of it, as I spoke of earlier, is in water improvements. So we need to distribute water resources better across the landscape. And then that allows us, to subdivide pastures and concentrate animal impact on smaller areas for shorter periods of time. So much more frequent movement of the animals. By doing that, we're resting larger pieces of the property for longer and longer periods of time. And not only is the length of rest and recovery really important, but also the quality of that. And so, rest during the growing season and prioritizing rest on every pasture during the growing season, allowing plants to reach their full potential and then set seed is really critical across the entire ranch. Once we've been able to achieve that on a large scale, we create a much healthier ecosystem there. That soil ecosystem has much greater biodiversity. There's much more life. And really it's the life in the soil that's that stored carbon piece in the center of the diagram, so that more plants, healthier plants, much greater diversity and biomass is what's pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it in the soil. That stored soil carbon, which is the management and verification that Jim talked about, is very important as well. That can be put into a unit, a carbon credit, which is a certificate that is retired as soon as the credits are received. So they can't be resold, they can't be traded again. And another really important aspect of the program. The only other two things that I'll cover really quickly is that, this isn't for every rancher, and this program also isn't for every company. So Native is very careful about screening applicants to the program. So we want ranchers that have a lot of improvements to make, especially early on in this project. We want ranches that will be good examples, and that there's a lot of room for improvement. And there has to be a lot of willingness to learn there as well. We're not talking about things that people are well versed in or have a strong understanding of. A lot of this is kind of new thinking and new practices. And the other side of it is the demand side. So Native is also pretty distinguishing about how they screen companies that come in. So we're not looking for companies that just emit and don't have a strong sustainability plan. Native wants to ensure that those companies have a commitment to taking care of their improvements internally first. So they're doing a lot of things to reduce waste streams. They're doing things to reduce travel, reduce emissions, a lot of times from a manufacturing standpoint first, and then they come to the offset market to purchase credits beyond that. But essentially what this diagram is showing is that companies and individuals emit carbon dioxide. The money that they invest in carbon credits can be used to improve grazing practices, which pulls carbon out of the atmosphere, creates healthier soil ecosystems, and that's really is a permanent source of carbon storage, because as long as they're not tilled up and those lands stay healthy and the ecosystems are vibrant, then that carbon is stored within the living organisms in the system. So with that, I'll wrap it up. I sent along another program flyer that the managers here can share with you for further information. And I'll just quit there and allow us to entertain some questions. So thank you all.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thanks everyone for the great presentations. As I mentioned before, we'll be following up to all of the registrants on the webinar with the slides, as well as a recording of the webinar. And if any folks don't get their question answered or have additional questions for our speakers, I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you follow up separately. But to kick us off, there was one question, I think maybe targeted more towards you, Chris, kind of about that climate smart language and how that plays in Montana, and if there's ever any pushback from ranchers on kind of describing the program as climate smart, or if you have to kind of discuss it in a different way to attract ranchers interested in supporting the program.
Yeah, that's a great question. Admittedly, in a lot of our rural areas, they're full of conservative people and conservative values, and unfortunately, the political divide is something that we always have to be conscious of. And so, what we really push people for and toward is that ranching with nature is a practice, a thought process, a new paradigm that will benefit your operation, regardless of any kind of climate or environmental benefits that you do or don't want to consider. And so, in general, agriculture is seen as a consumptive practice. It's, similar to mining or logging, where you're extracting things from the environment. And admittedly, water-wise, soil health-wise, biodiversity-wise, a lot of the agricultural practices that we have, although we've created a really effective system for producing food for the world, they do damage to a lot of those environmental processes. So if we can reverse some of those practices or change them up slightly so that we're not damaging nature in certain ways, then we can do things that benefit your operation. They allow you to raise a greater diversity of crops and animals and more pounds of those while benefiting the environment at the same time. So I think it's something that is real and recognized, but we have to get over if we're gonna really care for the environment, if we're gonna hand a healthier world over to our children. And so I appreciate the question, and we definitely handle that with care.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm sure coming from Montana, you have experience talking about both the environmental benefits and benefits to the ranchers. So great to hear how you're approaching that. I think just to pull in Jim and Guiha here, I think maybe it would be helpful for you two to talk a little bit about your specific outreach and engagement with rural communities. Is that something you've had a challenge with? I think we've heard from a couple states that, you know, they have programs or they have resources for rural communities, but just kind of getting communities interested or educated about the opportunities is a challenge. So maybe Jim, if you could kick us off about how that's going in Iowa.
Sure. I can't say a great deal about it. The outreach is really not central to my role, but yeah, the additionality question is really key. There's a lot of some bitterness amongst those who've been long-term use of some of the conservation practices being excluded for some of the offset programs. But what's maybe helping some with that is there's a number of these insetting programs that Chris referred to that are providing some per bushel premiums for conservation practices where the additionality element isn't always a consideration. And so kind of seeing a lot of potential growth in those insetting program incentives, which also begin to link with the multiple ecosystem benefits of these practices and begin to incentivize those as well. And so I think that helps. And I think, you know, the climate change language is somewhat less sensitive than it was. It's still there, but I think that's softening some here. But the complexity of the multiple programs we're kind of seeing that as an increasing challenge because there's so many things to keep track of and make sure you don't do things that conflict.
Thanks. Yes, not even in the agriculture and carbon sequestration space. I'm sure ranchers and farmers are dealing with a lot of programs. But Guiha, I'll turn it over to you to talk through some of the California perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Actually, in California, we have really diverse farmers and ranchers. Now we have Native Indian tribes, and we have people speak Spanish only or speak the native language, not English. So also we have we named as disadvantaged communities or low income communities, which will suffer. They really suffer the poor air quality and poor water quality and lots of environmental issues. Since our program started, I think for all our incentives program, we have prioritized fundings to those communities. Like we I think since 2018, we're required to provide at least 25% of our funds to those we named it socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. Most of them don't speak English. They don't have access to technology like computer, and some of them even don't have email or very old fashioned. So we try to help them first to when we find any program, we just required to use 25% funding to help those people. And also we have a technical assistance program that's locally distributed in each county. So we ask them to at least to provide the cost should be 25% that goes to those communities. And also we have a system through universities. State university has extension programs. So we ask them. We have each county also have we said the CES is conservation education specialist, which we have a contract with universities and they hire specialists to help farmers and ranchers in each county. And they focus on those socially disadvantaged communities or low-income communities, and the severe, like those communities has no air and water qualities. So we are really focused to help them.
Thank you. Yeah, your comment on work with the university queued up kind of another question that's come up, and maybe Jim, you might have some insights here too. Do you know kind of on a national level what kind of other universities are working in the agricultural carbon sequestration space, or if they have an agricultural extension that state energy offices could be engaging with? I'm not sure if you know of any other programs or departments across the country.
Yeah, I don't have a very extensive specific knowledge other than I know like places like Illinois in particular have a number of programs that say most agricultural states have some element of this at present, but I don't know the nature of their outreach.
Great, thanks. Well, one last question maybe to wrap us up, and maybe Chris, this could go to you first, is kind of with a lot of these climate smart agriculture and other practices, folks were curious, with the need for changing grazing practices or other activities for the ranchers, are there more workforce needs or trainings available for ranchers and farmers that you're conducting? I know, Guiha, you mentioned some technical assistance for applying for the programs, but curious if you know of anything available for the actual ranchers as they kind of change that grazing practice.
Yeah, I really feel like that's a quickly expanding opportunity field. There'll be government programs that are already out. I mean, there's numerous NRCS and FSA programs that encourage better management. We're working with a lot of different private companies that would like to pay more and have better marketing opportunities for people that are managing in a more environmentally friendly way. It gives the companies a nice competitive edge for their products. And so I think there are more and more opportunities all the time for creating incentives to reward better management. So, as both speakers talked about previous to me, measuring the impact of those practices in the environment and really measuring the practices themselves and how to differentiate one operation from the next is a big challenge. And there'll be a lot of AI, artificial intelligence, that will lend itself to helping to articulate that and allow us to deliver that information and data to the customers. But yeah, I think that's a quickly expanding marketplace, and there'll be a lot of programs that come out that create financial incentives for that. And I think it's just important for people to keep their eyes open and understand what they need to do, what the work is involved, and then just keep your eye out for programs and get involved as they come.
Great, thanks. Anything to add in our last minute, Jim or Guiha?
Just a quick note that the ag retail sector is increasingly important here in the Midwest in terms of their technical support and how they manage farmers' data, and that's a key connecting point for the grain dealers, processors up and down the supply chain, that ag retail professional agronomist in between as a go-between.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think that I learned from Chris that you kind of have a private company to help with the carbon sequestration. I hope we have more private sectors companies to involve in this work.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for participating in the webinar and for the informative presentations. We look forward to continuing to work with all of you in this space. And thank you again to the U.S. Department of Energy for their support of our rural activities. Have a great day, everyone.